Hi, my friends. I am going to do a sample bone reading for you or casting for you. And it's not really so much of a tutorial, it's just to kind of show you how it goes. And so I'm going to do this like it's a real reading. It's not a real reading for a person, but I am going to work with a question just to give you a sense of how this would be if you're curious. And just for context, the question is that this is a person who wants to know how they can sort of bring more oomph to their sex life. Contextually, they're a non-binary person who uses they pronouns and who is pansexual. So, sort of knowing that question, how do they spice up their sex life in this particular reading? We're gonna jump in, and I'll do it as though I were doing a real reading. So what I would say for you, if I were doing a reading for you, or if I were doing a reading for anybody, is really, I'm going to do the casting, thinking of the question. Might be a little quiet as I start to sort of just see what I see. The arrangement of this, contextually, this represents north, winter, and air. This represents east, spring, and water. This is summer, south, and fire, and then west, earth, and autumn. That doesn't always play into the equation, but it might. I'm also sort of looking at what pieces represent you, and I'm also looking at what sort of falls out of the circle or into the margins, and what's sort of at the heart of the reading. So beyond that, it's really just a question of doing the reading. So let's dive in. Where I'm going to be looking first is for the brown chess piece, which represents you. So let's just do our toss here. Right. So, like I said, I'm going to start by looking for the brown chess piece, which is right here. And I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so we can sort of see what's around you. To start with, so we're talking about your sex life and sort of how to spice things up for yourself. So I first want to see what's sort of conditionally around you. And there's a lot going on, which right out of the gate may suggest that there's so much going on that may be impacting either your sex drive or your interest, or maybe you're getting distracted. But there's a really interesting little thing going on here. I don't know if you can quite see it. I'm going to move things just a little bit. I don't want to... But this is an Allen wrench. We've got a tool sort of coming right out of the front of your face. So this is clearly something that's important to you. But I'm worried that there's a sense of sex as a competition. And one of the reasons I say that is because right underneath that is this little blue ribbon. I get a sense of the fluidity of your sexual nature because we have this vertebra bone here. So all of this is just giving me some context. So another thing that's interesting too is this sort of like way that you've fallen upside down, which I don't think is a negative thing. I just think it sort of means that I think this is dogging you a lot. I think that this is a thing that you're sort of like, I really need some more oomph there. So that's interesting for me to know. Another thing that I'm going to look at is sort of where things are pointing. So we've got this wrench here, this Allen wrench that's pointing here to what is a scapula bone, in this case, a raccoon scapula bone or shoulder bone. And I look at that to explore the idea of what's on our shoulders, what's resting on our shoulders. And we've got a knife and this jack-o'-lantern, and then there's this scales here. What's most important to me right now is the combination, because these two things so closely, I think there's some fear at play, and actually that may be cutting you off from exploring this part of your life. Something that has conditioned you is making it really hard for you. It's actually separating your sexuality from yourself. It's weighing on your shoulders. The scales of justice here, sort of reversed or upside down, gives me a feeling of societal norms kind of coming into play. So it's a thing of like, even though you have sort of accepted yourself, and your sexuality and your gender identity and your personhood, there is a little bit of like outside, the BS of like societal expectations, right? It's like, oh no, but what if it's wrong? You know what I mean? And like you have described yourself to me as someone who is pansexual, non-binary. Like you're not a person who's necessarily given to being restricted by binary thinking, and yet there's a little something that's still weighing on you that could be getting on the way, and that's worth considering. Now, this is a broken piece of a star. This star is about to be retired, so I'm actually going to take this out because I should have done that before. So that's a piece that what's been replaced is a compass, which I'll come back to later. Actually, I may not because it's not in the margins. So I think we have to deal with societal expectations a little bit. And part of the thing about sexuality is that it's not a thing that we do alone, right? I mean, it can be. It's part of that. But in this case, we're talking about having, sexual experiences with others. So there's a little bit of like fear and anxiety and partly to do with societal expectations. Also, I zoomed out, but I'm going to zoom back in. This little skull here, this skull is sort of a morphing piece. So it can kind of represent your brain, what's going on in your head, structures. It can also represent sort of old things, family things. It's again, there's this knife that has sort of cut your skull off from you, and there's again, it's just like being stuck in a perception of fear. That's really interesting. So that is a thing that we want to sort of understand as a barrier, as a potential barrier. Something that's getting in the way of your goal. That's a thing. And what's funny is this little four-leaf clover here is like, it's like the getting lucky. You know what I mean? Like it represents luck. We're talking about getting lucky. There's all this stuff between you and that. But there's also this little butterfly that's there to so you're in a transitional phase, and so it may be harder to sort of understand the nature of what you're facing to a certain degree because you're still not fully formed yet, which most of us aren't, right? But you're still sort of exploring this. But that's not a barrier, it's just a thing that's happening. So we know kind of like what may be standing in the way. I'm also going to come over here and just, so the white chess piece sort of represents other, right? Something opposing. We've already kind of gotten a sense of opposition here, and I'm just going to look, and what's really telling is, first of all, this doll head, right? This is your head. This is where your mind is, and it's almost like these two buttons down here sort of represent being fixed to something. It's almost like the idea of opposition, or the idea of being, it's like anyone potentially is interesting must want to reject me. They, because I'm too different, I'm too, whatever. And I'm really stuck to this idea. So I think that's a perception of others, of partners. Normally this would be kind of, you could think of it as an enemy, but it's not, I think, given the context. But there's this perception in the back of your head that is, and I'm saying literally the back of your head because we're looking at the back of the head facing the other. But these buttons, they fix things too. They secure things. The moon, so it's a phase, I would say, but you're in a phase of doing this right now. So the perception, again, is really kind of interesting to me. And because perception has become such a thing in this reading so far, I'm actually looking for the cat's eye shell, which is right up here. You can sort of see it's on the edge, so it's connected to this. It's on the edge of being marginal, so you may be on the edge of changing your perceptions. And I say the cat's eye shell represents that because it's a cat's eye shell, right? So perception, eye. I also feel like, so here, I'm going to move down a little bit. Here, we've got this wick, right? And the wick to me is going to sort of indicate arousal, or the potential for arousal here. And it's surrounded by nutmeg, and it's surrounded by cinnamon, which are spicy. So, like, the energy is there, but I think the perception is the thing that's getting in the way. There's a lot, I would say there's a fair amount of value that you associate with sexuality, you know what I mean? Because the coin down here is sort of indicates value to a certain degree. But again, these things are so marginal that it's like they're almost on the edge of the reading. It's like almost like we're pushing them out of the reading. And so I think, again, that's another byproduct of this perception of kind of like having to go into enemy territory almost, or being rejected by, turned away from, the way that this piece is sort of face down and turned away from the rest of the reading. So the fact that this is so marginal makes me think that you could be on the edge of releasing yourself from this, but it's still very much at play. I also want to point out the passport here, really closely connected to all of this. That's another version of your identity. And again, it's another connection to like perception, who I am, how are people perceiving me. We have a cell phone for communication. So there's almost a sense of like, will people understand what I'm bringing to the table? And that seems to be a self-imposed feeling, a self-imposed sense of perception, to go there again. But it's part of your identity, and you're sort of wondering, is my identity enough? Here's this treasure chest that's sort of spilled open, It's like, am I enough? Do I have enough to offer? Yeah, of course, everyone does. You know what I mean? But like, there's this self-perception that I think is weighing on you. I'm going to come over here. So I'm going to start looking for some things that represent sexuality. And I'm picking up this elephant so you can see something. I'll put him back in a second. But this is a pelvis bone. And so this is the thing I look at specifically for sexuality. And the elephant on top of it. So what I'm seeing is that there's a little bit of anxiety. The bell sort of is like, oh no, my sexuality. It's like there's this alert that's happening there. The elephant and the foot bone here, to me, offer the indication that someone who you can trust, someone who you feel is loyal to you, you may sort of want some experience in a comfortable place with people so that it's not feeling kind of overwhelming and you're safe. So in order to sort of get through the self-perception stuff, you may need some safe experiences that, and it doesn't necessarily need to be like stereotypically sexual. You know what I mean? Like, it could be sexual in a more metaphorical way. But the idea being here that you just need a little comfort, someone you can trust. That's going to go a long way. There's also, I'm going to move him again. There's this mask here, and that just gives me a sense of like, it's upside down, it's face down, and that it's like someone you don't have to pretend with, so you need to know that you're safe. You need to know that, like, yeah, you can have a spicy sex life if you want to, but it's got to be sort of grounded for you in something safe and something that feels where you can trust, and you feel like you're loyal, or they're loyal to you, they have loyalty to you. I'm going to come over here now. So there's this little bracelet, and I use this to sort of always pay attention to because it's like circling. It circles something. And what we've got in here is a rabbit, a little bunny. There's a hummingbird, this arm, and then this cardinal. So let me actually zoom in again so you can see these things. This little trifecta here, not a trifecta because there's more than three things, but quadrifecta, is giving a lot of information. First of all, again, sexuality, very important. The rabbit sort of is fecundity, fertility in that sense. How rabbits are just sort of stereotypically, they breed. And then there's this speed, there's this rush. It's almost like this arm is sort of coming out of the rabbit and reaching towards this heart, towards commitment. Oh my God. So it's almost like there's some sense of like expectation. Again, so the cardinal is our ancestors. And so there's this thing of like, I know that like I'm living in a new world and I want to experience sexuality in my way, but because I've been conditioned by my ancestors and by my history, my personal history, to expect a certain something from sex and sexuality, that this is a thing that we have to wrestle with too, like, because this is not casual. This wants to be, the rabbit wants to be, and so does the hummingbird underneath, but it's so connected to this cardinal, and this arm is reaching for marriage. In fact, we don't just have a heart and a ring here, we've got a lodestone. which is the attraction thing. It's a magnet. So it's literally like, oh my God, I know I want to have more casual experiences, but like the connection, I'm so conditioned right now to expect traditional sort of relational outcomes. You know what I mean? This is something to really pay attention to. So again, it's a perception issue, that we're holding on to, that's sort of making it hard to let go of. So I'm just pausing to catch my breath, and again, there's a lot here to see what we see. So to come back to your question initially, while I just sort of look again, how do I spice up my sex life? You've got to sort of deal with the perceptions you've got about your own value, your own humanity, your own attractiveness. I think this fear of being cut, of being hurt, you know what I mean, is weighing on your shoulders, but also the fear that other people aren't going to dig you, you know what I mean? They are. It's just a matter of like this conditioning down here, and this sort of somewhat outdated for you emotional reaction to sexuality is forcing you sort of into old-fashioned patterns that you're not interested in right now, but that are really deep inside you. And so there's this thing: how do you sort of release yourself from that? So I'm going to look for some indications of release here, of releasing yourself anyway, from that feeling, or achieving perception shift, maybe another way to say it. And so what are we looking for? I'm not, there's nothing sort of jumping out at me as sort of like immediately the answer to that question. So I'm going to just sort of scan up here for things that speak to perception. So, I'll be quiet for a second as I do that. So actually this walnut shell, which sort of represents our brain, is calling me. So I'm going to start here, right here, because perceptions form in the mind, right? Like it's a brain's reaction to a condition. And what have we got around it? We've got a jawbone here, and I don't think I can get much closer, but it's a jawbone with a little plus sign on it, which means we have to start articulating things out loud that are going to recondition our brain to teach us safety. Why do I say safety? This shells protect. So here's our mind, here's our jaw, here's our mouth, so to speak, and here's our shell. We have to start talking to ourselves lovingly, and to teach our value. This is pyrite. This is fool's gold. This sort of stands in for gold in the reading. So we're starting to teach ourselves that we're safe. And that, for you, in this case, actually means active self-talk, which is a difficult thing to do. But we think about how deep that cardinal, right, the ancestors, how deep this perception goes, we're going to have to really work hard to train ourselves. So normally I would be less inclined to look at what's over here because they are sort of out of the margins. But because everything is connected here, excuse me, I'm going to pay attention to it, and it's going to be interesting because of this birdcage. So that's your value, your self-perception of value, of sexual value, of attractiveness, is somewhat influenced by some closed conditions. But this mushroom here sort of represents, well, it could represent a few things. It could represent sort of intoxication, sort of loosening up that way. That's not really a good piece of advice, so I'm not going to say that that's the meaning. What this does sort of suggest to me is fantasies. I think that sort of allowing yourself plenty of time to dream big, to dream, to fantasize, will endanger, here's a panda that we use to represent endangerment, will endanger the negative self-perceptions, by which I mean it'll actually start eating away at them. A little bit of a poor thing for the panda, right? Because we think of, pandas as endangered, but they, the endangerment of being locked up. There's a locking up your mind. So it's literally an active self-talk. And there actually is a set of lips right here, which is interesting. And I'm going to sort of take this arm that's reaching here toward this pen. A pen is, this is what this gray thing is indicative of communication. Again, sort of putting into language what it is we need to learn. And that, I think it may mean not only talking, but writing. So I pause now just to sort of look for anything else that feels important. You can see in this spread, there's a lot of things that are sort of like clustered together in this arena, right? So how am I sort of deciding what matters? It's both the things that are relevant contextually, but also the things that I sort of know and use to explore a certain topic, right? Like one thing I was looking for early on was the compass to say, well, how do we fix this? Where do we go? The compass is upside down though, and it's outside of the margins. So even though there's an interesting little cluster, like before you start searching for where you want to go to meet people, you've got to deal with all this. Not everything in these clusters is super relevant, but the things that I'm pointing out are, like I haven't talked about the squirrel. Squirrels gather, and that's not necessarily huge here, except that this crucifix is sort of there with it, and it's almost like you want to sort of turn away. I'm using the squirrel's direction here, facing the fool's gold as this is your value. Turn away from like old self-perceptions. There's an owl under there that are kind of old wisdoms, right? Those are not applicable to you anymore. And this little piggy bank here, I don't know if you can see that. I'm zooming it in. Is again a thing of like, you probably won't see it, but there's this little piggy bank here of like your value is dictated by someone else gathering you, but that's not your value. Your value has to come from how you talk to yourself. So I think that that's the answer in this particular question. I think, again, I just want to revisit this because we didn't talk about it much, but again, sexual experiences with people who you're close to and trust, if that's an option, will help teach yourself safety as well. But that's a thing that I think is really, really key, is, feeling safe. But that begins, in essence, with you sort of relearning your own hang-ups and your own self-perceptions, your own self-limitations. Because people are out there, but your perceptions probably are the things that are stopping you rather than their perceptions. Like the other player here isn't active, it's a perception in the back of your head of what really is active. Anything else that leaps out as important? I don't think so. Actually, here's this key. And I didn't notice this earlier, but it's sort of coming out of the top of your chess piece here, and it's creating this loop. And so the keys open things up, is the solution. Here we have the root and the sun, and it's touching this tool and this gun. And I'm taking this to be very sexual as well, and it sort of aligns back with the mushroom I talked about earlier, that sort of grounding yourself in sort of sexy thinking. And I think that the reading's being a little cheeky here with you didn't see the tool in the gun. This is a screwdriver and a gun. Both very sort of sexual metaphor, a tool, a gun. Like there's firing pistols. Like I think that this is just saying, again, like if you sort of build up in your mind the need, eventually you'll have to sort of make yourself go in search of the release, in this case the gun, serving that tool, right? But it's, I think spending some time rooting yourself in sort of sexy thinking, and sort of making yourself the star in a way of like sexual fantasies may be, again, another helpful thing for you. Again, this is a sample reading. In many longer or real readings, this might go on much longer. These readings tend to last 30 to 35 minutes, maybe sometimes more. I try to keep them under 30 because practicality and just attention span, but we're coming up on 30 minutes now anyway. So that's kind of a sense of how this works, right? You can see that I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to the directions. They weren't that important in this particular reading. and that's okay, right? That's just not a thing that mattered now. Sometimes it will. If it were to matter, I would say that this summer should be spent sort of dealing with these perceptions, and this fall should be spent dealing with these perceptions. But I don't think you need to wait. I think, in fact, it's better to start doing it now. So that is your reading, and that would be similar to a reading that you got with me. So I hope that this is interesting and exciting to see. If you have any questions about how I got where I did, please let me know. And otherwise, I hope you're well. Take care and be good. Bye.